Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's program, TI People of the Book. My name is Irene Stoller, and I'm the chair of the Cultural Arts Committee here at Temple Israel. One of our main goals for this event is community building. We have a very diverse and talented membership and staff here at Temple Israel, and we hope this is just one of many opportunities to get to know each other a little better through the arts. Our panelists represent a broad range of genres, and I think you'll find that each has a unique story that they're going to share with us today. We may also have a few aspiring writers in our audience, and we hope that you will be inspired, as well as get some practical suggestions for starting your own projects. Please note that we have some handouts on the tables, which include a brief biography of each author on our panel, as well as some resources for writers that were compiled by our panelist, Elizabeth Gonzalez-James. And at the end of the formal program, the authors will be available to chat individually. Some will be selling copies of their books. And before we begin, I just want to thank our panelists for participating in this program, the Temple Israel staff for helping us with the logistics, and a huge thanks to Deborah Getz, our Vice President of Jewish Communal Life. This program was her brainchild, and she was my partner every step of the way in putting this together. But since she's a little biased maybe towards one of the authors, I'm going to be the moderator. So now I'm going to ask our panelists to each introduce themselves.
Thank you, Irene and Deborah. My name is Shai Simonson. All my books are nonfiction. They're about mathematics and computer science. One of them is a textbook for intro programming. Two of them are meant to be mathematics books for anyone, not necessarily a professional. And the most recent one is called Looking for Math in All the Wrong Places, which is all about how math is all around you if you know where to look, instead of thinking that it's just what you learned 20 years ago and you can forget about it. There's also the book that I wrote when I tore my ACL.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Elizabeth Gonzalez-James. I'm a fairly new member at TI. We've been members for about a year. I've been a writer for 12 years. My first book came out last year in 2021. It's a dark comedy called Mona at Sea. And next year I have what's called a chapbook coming out, which is just a really short book, about 60 pages. And that's called 5 Conversations About Peter Sellers. And then I have another book coming out in January 2024 called The Bullet Swallower, which is a full-length novel, and it's a magical realism western. And thank you, Deborah and Irene, by the way, so much for having us today. I'm really excited to talk to everybody.
My mother and father's daughter, Ariel Grossman. But for the purposes of this panel, I'll be going by my pen name, Ellie Martin McKenzie, which is still very within the family. I've been an author a very short period of time. I have one book out, it's called Turtle A, and I'm currently working on a second book, a novel, and I just signed the contract on a series of short stories about life after death. So that's my stuff.
Hi everybody, I'm Ken Getz. I'm that author who is related to Deborah Getz. First I want to say what a pleasure to be here among our other panelists, and I know also we probably have some of you in the audience who've published yourselves or have looked at doing this in the past, and it's really a remarkable experience, and I hope we'll really get into the many ways that you can do that. I've been a writer for about 30 years, but a writer of peer review articles for professional research community. And over time, some of my work got noticed, and I was encouraged to take some of the work that we've done and convert that into a book. So I have several books. Most have been written for professionals. The two that I'm going to share with you tonight include this book, which is actually written for patients, and it's actually a guide to help patients and their families navigate the unfamiliar terrain of clinical trials, which is the industry that I focus on within an academic setting. And then the second book that I'm going to talk about is really just an extension of my love of everything related to the Beatles. And so, whereas this book was written for a very specific audience and it generates revenue that is donated to a charity that I founded to help patients, this specific book was written purely as a labor of love, which is a great reason to write a book as well. And I wrote this with my brother, and I'll tell you more about it when we have a chance to get into the details. Not my brother Michael, my brother Ron. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sosa, and I know you always see me around. I work with Temple Israel, and I've worked here for about 7 months now. I was born in a small town in South Africa when my mom ran away during the war by Idi Amin, and that's why I was born. But when I reached 7, she moved me to Kenya, and that's where I grew from, but she was Uganda. I started doing journalism investigation in African countries. I've been to most African countries to try to see if the system is the same and what ways they could change. But I ended up, in lots of sagas. I've interviewed and investigated one of the famous journalists here who worked with Bush, who was in Africa, and he was held there for about 6 months in prison. And so when I came to America, it wasn't my dream, but situation make you come. So I ended up here, and I didn't have anything to do because as a journalist who has property, a house with a swimming pool, and you come to America, you start living in a small room, sharing, and it was a big challenge. So I lived in a very nice area, which is Lexington, a rich area, but I wanted to see what challenges the African American faces. And so if you want to know the situation, you have to be in it for you to understand. So I went to African American and realized there's certain challenges if they resolve within themselves before we talk about the race and equal opportunities. You have to work upon yourself. So I got out a book, it's called Sikununu. She's a little black girl who you will hear the story during the talk.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. We'll start with some of the questions. Not everyone's going to answer every question, but we'll try to get to everybody so you really get to know everyone well. So our first question is, what was your path to publication? And I'm going to start with Shai.
The first book that I published was a textbook, and textbooks generally don't need an agent to help you publish. You pitch it to big publishing companies like McGraw-Hill or Addison Wesley or something like that. So we did pitch it, and my co-author and I, and it was immediately they liked it, and we signed a contract, and that was, I don't know, but 4 or 5 years of work and lots of editing. Afterwards, I started writing these books that are a little meant for a more popular audience and not a textbook, and there, even for nonfiction, it's really considered, you really need an agent. So I learned how to write proposals to find an agent, and then I found this agent who was very successful. It was an agent in a company, I think Park Literary was the company, and they represent Nicholas Sparks. So I'm thinking, all right, well now all I have to do is sit back until they sell my book. And my particular agent worked pretty hard, and she was all right, and after about 6 months I realized she's not gonna sell this book. She keeps trying and trying, she doesn't really get it. So after a certain amount of time I said, what do you think? And she goes, I'm not sure. And I go, well, I have a lead, and I pitched it directly to a publisher, and they were interested. So I told her, I think we're done. And then it ended up getting published through that. And the second popular book was similar. I went back to the same publisher. They liked the first one, so they did the second one. So all of this was without an agent, even though I was informed, and I think it is still considered the weird way to do it. The last book, the book about the ACL tear, I didn't have an agent and I didn't have a publisher, and I wrote it and I edited it and I did it like I was doing a really professional job, and then I realized nobody's ever going to publish this unless I publish it myself. So I did publish that myself, and I don't know, I think that sells just as well as the other one. So I'm not sure that publishers always know what's going to sell, and sometimes you become very successful even when you don't go through a mainstream way. that was my path.
Yeah, I actually have a somewhat similar story. I wrote my first book, I finished it in 2015, and I'd never written a book, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I thought it was pretty good. So I sent it out to agents, and I got an agent right away, and I got, also like Shai said, I got an agent who worked at a really great agency. They represented Lena Dunham and some of these other people, so I was like, okay, I got it made in the shade with lemonade, this is great. And my agent started sending it around to editors, and it went out for a full year, and it went out to like something like 45 editors, and everybody loved it, and nobody wanted to buy it. And the feedback we got was, it's hilarious, but we don't know how to market it. And book publishing is a business, and they just did not know like where on the shelf to position it. So, and my agent said, you know, I can't send this out anymore, so write another book. And so I was really upset, and I put the book in a drawer, metaphorically, and I did write another book. And in the meantime, I would send the first book out occasionally to small presses, and contests, like not really expecting anything. In 2019, I sent it to a contest run by the Santa Fe Writers Project, which is a small press. And to my surprise, I was a finalist, and they offered me a contract for publication. So this is now 4 years after it had first gone out. I'd basically given up on it, and yeah, they ended up publishing it, and it's done really well. So it was a book that I'd completely given up on, but it ended up, you know, being a book that I think has been well received in the marketplace. And so I've been really, really happy about it, and I'm really thankful also for having failed to find a publisher initially, because when you write a book, the worst thing that can happen is nobody wants to publish it. And like that happened to me. So I've already been through the worst thing that could possibly happen. So like nothing can faze me at this point. Like my skin is like alligator thick. So yeah, everything is all good from here on out.
So my track was a little bit different and a little bit strange. I didn't try to be a writer. It was never something I was aspiring for. I was writing fan fiction, and I got very lucky because apparently one of the people who read my fan fiction was creating a startup publishing house, and
Can you just explain what fan fiction is? I'm not sure everyone knows.
Yeah, okay. Fan fiction is when fans are very into a certain piece of media or literature or what have you, and they write their own stories about the characters, or taking those characters and putting them in different settings, or just taking that world but creating their own characters to be within it. And so it's taking the work that already is established by that piece of media, but then telling your own story with it. So I was writing fan fiction, and the publisher that found me was creating a startup digital publishing house, and they found my work and messaged me on the platform I was using. And at first I thought it was a bot. Like, I didn't think it was real, because they were like, would you want to publish with us? And this was something so out there to me and never even occurred to me that I was like, what? So I did a lot of digging and research, and they sent me a lot of their actual like business material, their business plan and everything. So I was like, okay, you're legit, you're a real place. So that went into step 2, where they were like, we want you to publish an original story with us. And I was like, I don't have an original story. So they sent me a pitch document, and I sat there for like 3 days trying to think of an original story. And then I was kind of going through a bit of an identity crisis, given that it was the pandemic and everything was weird. And I was also watching a TV show that had inspired me called Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, which is following this idea of a holistic detective who kind of trips, and if he trips, that is a part of his case, and that thing he tripped on is now a clue. He doesn't actually like do detective work, he just stumbles and it's there. So I was kind of taking that idea of like the universe guiding me or guiding things, and I was, thinking about that and how the publishing very much felt like that. And so I came up with this story of Turtle A about a girl who's gone so headlong into that she's lost her sense of identity, and a guy who's the dead opposite of, like, he doesn't believe in fate or God or a higher power, and he's very angry and self-centered, and it's what do you get when those two people sit in a room and have a conversation. So I pitched that, and they were like, this is weird. We've never seen anything like this before. We want to sign. We're like, yeah, we've never read a book like this. Yes, let's do it. And I was like, all right, so I wrote that, and they published it.
As I mentioned, I had done a lot of writing for peer-reviewed journals, but I was increasingly getting inquiries from patients who were reading a lot of these medical articles and technical articles. So I sensed there was demand for a very different audience than one that I was reaching. While I was writing a lot of these research articles, I started getting invitations to make appearances on radio talk shows and a couple of cable programs. I gave a talk at the 92nd Street Y, for example, and that generated a remarkable amount of interest from the patient community. So I really sensed that this was an audience that was starving to have some information about clinical research, sort of, as I mentioned, an area an environment that most people are not familiar with until you've been diagnosed with an illness for which there is no treatment at this time. So you're looking to gain access to an investigational drug. So I literally put together a treatment like others have mentioned here, and I circulated it to some publishers. I also had a relationship with Thomson Reuters. They were very familiar with a lot of the work that I had done, and I ended up actually signing a contract with them. And what appealed to me was that I could use the proceeds of the book after all the expenses, the marketing and the printing expenses. All of the proceeds would be donated to a charity of my choice. So I was able to structure a really nice arrangement. This particular book sells very well because companies, pharmaceutical companies, and the NIH buy copies and distribute them in bulk. So this book, we've sold well over 750,000 copies. They're often given out in physicians' waiting rooms. Some of them are given out at health expos and that sort of thing. So it's really been exciting to watch. It's now in its 3rd edition, and we have the 4th edition underway. So it's really taken on a life of its own. And this is an environment that's changing dramatically. More patients are participating with handheld devices and remotely today, not having to visit a physical location to be in a clinical trial. So the focus of the book has changed a lot. As I mentioned, this one was really just an area of personal interest to me and my younger brother. And we've been reading a lot about self-publishing and how easy it is to do it. And it's true. There are so many places where you can go to hire a freelance copy editor, a graphic designer. You can really pull together the team that you need. Many people do all of it themselves. And then you can put this up on a lot of the online book distributors, including Amazon, as well as Barnes & Noble, and you can actually handle all of the distribution yourself. So, and some people do extremely well with topics that might really appeal to a large audience. This is a really esoteric audience. These are Beatles fans who love economics as well. And so it's a very small number of people, but it really focuses on quantifying the amount of revenue that the Beatles brand generates each year from their music, from their art, from Beatles-themed cruise shows and Cirque du Soleil. Anybody want to guess how much the brand generates annually? A lot is a good answer. About $500 million a year, and the Beatles broke up in the 70s, so that's remarkable. So this would be ideal for like a business school class, looking at understanding what makes a brand endure.
So I started writing books when I opened up a hospital in a different country from where I was living, because cancer is a great problem in my country. So I ended up going to a different country where I got an opportunity to get some contract with the American Embassy. You go to Africa, you get lost. You don't know Africa. I know Africa more than anybody here. So when you get lost, the American Embassy hires people like us to, go out there, speak certain languages. And so during that moment, when I opened up a hospital, to run a hospital in Africa, it's very difficult. So I looked for ideas. I said, I know graphics, I can draw cartoons. And so I drew a cartoon, and I had somebody who was working with BBC, and he says, hey, so I can give you some good money. Could you fix Swahili and English together? And then we formed something called the Tinga Tinga Tales. It's played mostly all over the African. Tinga 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 Tinga, so kids, And this came out because I used to watch lots of cartoons, and I wanted to see the mind of kids. What attracts them. Like right now in America, parents have started playing certain audio and the kid will come from the bedroom to the sitting room. So when I realized that, all kids have the same thinking, it's just parents raising them different. And so I started doing graphics, drawing those cartoons and selling them to BBC, and that was my idea of the Tinga Tinga Tale. So when I came here, this is my first book. It's called Sikununu, a little girl who grew up in the hood. They call it Rat Hood or Rat Hood. And that area has lots of different mindset, and for her to get out and out to say, let me try. What do whites do to succeed? If I go there, then I come back here, I may tell them how they struggle. Because trust me, you and me, I don't know what you go through in your house, but there is a certain way you're struggling to come out. And if everybody understood that, then we would try our best to become what we can. And that's the book that I want to speak too much to African American and to Africans and tell them, hey, if we stand here, two of us, there's a difference between an African and an African American, but how do we go through all of this? If we have such opportunities to sit down and discuss issues. And so that's all my books are about. I always like to find solutions for such problems. So it's starting writing this, I feel, so the message can go out there and you can get people say, hey, can I help you? Can I help you? And that's how it's been.
Elizabeth, did you have a mentor who guided you through the writing or publication process?
Sort of. In 2016, I went to a writer's workshop called Lit Camp, which is out in California, in the Napa wine region. And that was amazing because I don't have an MFA, and so I was 100% self-taught, and it was basically just me like sitting at my desk talking to myself all day. And that was the first time that I had ever had the opportunity to be around other aspiring writers. And we worked with Adam Johnson, who wrote The Orphan Master's Son, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and we worked with Paul Harding, who wrote Tinkers, which also won the Pulitzer Prize. And so I've been able to go to writers' conferences and workshops over the years. I went to Bread Loaf up in Vermont, and I went to Tin House in Oregon, and every time along the way I've taken copious notes and tried to just cram as much learning into my brain as possible, because those are my opportunities, for soaking it in. And the other thing that I did, which is not quite mentoring, but I have a writers group that we meet every month and we share pages from what we're working on, and we've been doing that since 2016. And I've learned so much from reading other people's writing and commenting on it, as I've learned as much doing that as I have actually writing myself. So anybody who is an aspiring writer, I think that a writing group, a critique group, a workshop group is absolutely vital to improving your work.
Like you, Elizabeth, I don't really think I had a mentor, but I certainly had colleagues who I know had published as well, and they really helped me think through the contracting process, which can be a little bit difficult. You know, a lot of publishers will give very, very little in the form of royalties to the author. You have to really know what to push for, and so there's a lot you have to be prepared to advocate for, and so that was really helpful. You know, just to be able to turn to colleagues who've been through that experience as well.
Ellie, what advice do you wish someone had given you at the beginning of your journey?
I wish I had had a kind of comprehensive walkthrough of what the writing world is, because I was and very much am a stranger to it. I wasn't familiar with the editing process. Which my publishers were very nice about walking me through. I wasn't familiar with contracts at all or negotiating them, and that was like a lot of back and forth and a lot of outsourcing help from other family friends and my parents, and it's still something, the contracts in particular is something I really struggle with and have a kind of nervous reaction towards. But I was like, someone had asked, are you ever gonna like try getting it into a print version? And I was like, I don't know how to go about. The publisher I work with right now, they are exclusively digital, and I don't know how you submit to other people. I didn't know about the agents or anything like that. I still don't. So for now, I'm sticking with the publisher I have because they're very easy to work with and they know me now. And they asked me, so I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll just keep going with you. But I have no idea how to go about any of this other stuff outside of them. And it would have been very nice, and it still would be very nice to have someone be like, all right, here's what you need to do, here's what you should be looking for, and so on and so forth.
That's a good question. I didn't really anticipate writing mostly in my life. I'm a professor and I communicate, but writing is not the way I really expected to do it. So I had no idea what the process was, just as the same situation as you find yourself in. Contracts were unfamiliar, the whole idea of how to pitch it was unfamiliar. I think having a co-author helped a lot because we were both in the same ignorant situation, so we could rely on each other. He'd say, does that sound right? And he'd say, I go, I don't know. And little by little, we worked our way through it, but I guess by the time I was on the third or fourth book, I had a general sense of how things work, and I would have wished to kind of know the whole process. I did not understand that an agent was basically the only way to talk to a publisher. It turns out it isn't, but it's mostly the only way. And if you have an agent, they have channels, and if you don't, then you can't really take advantage of those channels. Most of your stuff will go to a black hole. And there are particular publishers, especially nowadays, Kim was saying how easy it is to self-publish. It's a very different world, and more channels are open now to get things that you're passionate about out there.
I just want to piggyback on what Shine had just said. I couldn't agree more. I would say in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been the advent of professional publishing houses that are playing off of the self-publishing environment. They'll come to you and they'll, with a little bit of knowledge about your background, they'll really go out of their way to flatter you, and they're looking for you to underwrite the entire cost to produce the book. They'll tell you that they can market it very well. Some are big name publishing houses, Forbes, Fortune magazine, go after the business community, but there are many others. And often you really end up with a party that doesn't know how to build a distribution channel and how to really represent your book the right way. So I think some of the most established publishing houses, some of the oldest publishing houses, or perhaps a really new publisher who cares about the digital domain and taking care of young writers, you just have to really do your homework and evaluate what you're really getting for the effort you're putting in. And I just want to add that the contracting part is always difficult. Even when you're experienced with it, publishers will calculate your share of the proceeds of the book in very different ways. Sometimes it's based on the gross revenue, often it's net of a whole host of expenses that you don't even realize they're going to take off of the top before you actually even get counted for the work that you've done. So you just have to read the fine print very carefully.
How do you manage your time? How do you balance your day job with your writing pursuits?
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. That's why I see when he writes a book of the 100 pages, I feel my book is only 12, and my sentences, children's book are not very hard, but they're very challenging with the content. So I'm from a different country and I'm here in America. The English, if you say you look tired in America, you're offending someone. So, and especially me who does the animation. So one, you can take the whole day rubbing it and put on away the paper, starting another one. So it's very difficult. The best thing is I choose where to work. When I came to America, I stayed 4 years without doing any work, getting some little money to come here, but that was the most hellish thing, getting shillings into dollars, they just fly. So I chose to work in a place where, you have that love, people understand you, and I've only decided to work in Jewish community, always, and in this Jewish community in Sharon I found the greatest love. And 3 years from now, I might be a greater name in Boston because I worked with the greatest. I'm going to launch the book in Boston Public Library, which is the hugest, and they've given me a huge offer. But it started with the Boston Athenaeum. I don't know if you know Boston Athenaeum, the first private library. So I met greatest author there. I talk to them every day. And they say, so, you're a great guy, do it. So I concentrated to get that out because of me choosing the kind of job and community that I would work for.
Thank you. Ellie, how do you manage your time and your day job with your writing?
It's rough. I work part-time at a customizable perfume store in New York, and it's exhausting, and it's a lot of customer-facing, interactions, and I get very tired because I don't gravitate towards being very social, and so it's very draining. And by the time I get home, my mind is very dead, and I don't want to write, or I don't want to. I can't. I'll try, and it just doesn't happen. So a lot of it is badly managed towards the end of the month, which is when I have my deadline to send in something. It'll be a week out, and I'll look at my 2 days off that I have, and I'll be all right, I need to write. And then I stress write a bunch of things in that 2 days, and hopefully it's not terrible. There is a level of, if for the months where I'm not totally drained, I'll try and when I get home I'll write if I have the bandwidth, or at the very least I'll write some fan fiction because I'm still doing that, and that'll kind of just be all right, now I'm in the practice of writing, which I can then transition into writing my original things because I'll be all right, this is my thought process now. I do a lot of trying to sneak writing in as well, especially if my deadline is approaching. So I have pages on my phone, and I'll write on the train, on the subway, as much as possible. If it happens to be a slow day at work, which I haven't had in a very long time, but I'll try and be writing under the counter while no one's looking, which is the best time because that means I'm getting actually paid to write. But it's a lot of sneaking in, even if it's only 1 or 2 sentences, it's sneaking it in where I can and trying to, even if I only write 4 sentences in one day, it's at least I wrote something that day and headway was made. and then really all like my days off are spent writing.
I guess my situation is very, very different from what everybody just described. I spend 5 or 6 years paying attention in my classes, just walking around, and every time I see something interesting, I either put it in here, or if I don't think this brain is going to remember it, I put it in some directory somewhere, and I collect it and collect it and collect it, and when 6 years is done, I ask my school for another sabbatical, and they say yes, and then I go home. And every single day, I get up in the morning, as soon as I get up, I put my laptop in my lap, and I start writing. And I write for 4 or 5 hours, and I don't stop. I never have any writer's block, I don't have any issues, I just write, write, write. And it's like throwing paint on a canvas. I got the general content, I know more or less what I want to say, and I just throw it down there in a reasonable order, in a reasonable organization. And then I go on, and I do it again and again and again. I do it day after day after day, and after about 4 months, I have a book, and then I edit it, and I edit it for another year. And then it starts to look decent. And once it starts to look decent, I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. It's like sanding down over and over again and over again until I don't find any mistakes, and then when it's all done, I find more. But just over and over. So I think, Elizabeth, you were saying that the worst thing is when you don't, get a publisher to accept your book. But there's such a variety of how much a publisher will support you once you're writing. So one of my books, my editors they just loved it, and they were like my parents. They wanted the book to succeed exactly the way I envisioned it. I had another publisher, and their idea was, well, how about writing this book instead of the book you want to write? Because I think I can sell this other book. I go, well, that's not my book. And it's really difficult to give up your child, your book, your blood, sweat, and tears, your soul, to change it in a severe way just so somebody can sell it. So that, I think, might be worse than not having a publisher, is getting somebody that really kind of mangles your idea.
Elizabeth, how many abandoned books or projects do you have, and do you ever go back to them?
Oh, that's a good question. I have, do I have any abandoned books? I have a lot of abandoned short stories, and I have a lot of book ideas that are sitting in the back of my mind, but I'm probably not ever going to write them. I really wanted to write one about a figure sort of like Britney Spears at her lowest moment, and just if she had a friend, one good friend, to tell her, girl, don't shave your head, don't hit that car with the umbrella. But I'm probably not gonna ever write that book, but it's there in the back of my head. But short stories are great because even if you get 5, 10 pages in, 20 pages in, if it's a longer short story, and then you're like, oh, this one's a dud, you wasted maybe a month, maybe a week, I don't know. So it's not that bad. I know Michael Chabon, who wrote The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. I think he messed around with a book for 5 years and then decided, okay, it's not going to work. And I have not had one of those yet. And hopefully that day never comes, but yeah.
I don't have any that I've abandoned. I have probably a list of maybe a dozen concepts for books that I would love to get to if I had the time. So I think often what happens is you sort of road test the idea. You share the concept with other people. Sometimes it morphs in some way. Often I end up combining 2 or 3 concepts together. So it's always nice to be able to just let it brew for a while before you actually sit down and begin the writing process. And I just wanted to add, Irene, that I found, like Shy, that it requires just a tremendous amount of discipline in order to get a book out there. And so in my case, I literally informed the family that on Sunday nights I was off limits, and I would just sequester in a room, close the door, and that was it. I would just write until 1, 2 in the morning, and that's how I would get through a book.
Houses such as Random House and Simon & Schuster, they were thinking of merging. How would that particular approach impact the fact that, well, these houses are just targeting very, very wide audiences?
So when I pitched Turtle A, there was a long period of time where we didn't know what genre it was. more specifically, I put in the pitch sheet, I do not know what genre this is. You need to tell me. And the publishers, for a very long time, were like, we don't know what genre this is. You need to tell us. And so we sat down one day and we're like, all right, what are we calling this? And what I remember I did a bunch of panels for them in colleges in India, like I would Zoom panel them, and one of the questions that I got at that time was, why is it important to have a genre? Establishing a genre, I think, is very important. I don't think you need to necessarily write with a genre in mind, because I certainly didn't, but then it falls on where you're gonna, from there on, place the book to actually get it picked up and to get people to read it. We went with philosophical fiction, which I didn't know was a genre, but apparently it is, and magical realism, so those are the two categories it falls under, and I've definitely heard of magical realism. And that's normally the one I'll say because that is the bigger name genre. So that is the one that I have a feeling where people are gonna recognize and be like, oh, okay. And if they like it, they'll read it. Whereas if I say philosophical fiction, usually the next thing that comes out is, so what is that? And then I have to explain that. So it is, as far as like marketing goes and knowing your audience and whatever, that kind of comes from, I think, genre.
Yeah, I agree completely. And so having a niche, whether it's it guides you in your writing, or at least it is a basis for knowing where to target your book in terms of the audience that it will reach, is so critical. When the publishing houses merge, they still will maintain publishers within specific genres, and that's really the markets they focus on. So often when they merge, it's because they don't have, or the organization that's driving the merger often is looking to acquire publishers within the organization they're buying that have expertise in a particular niche that is now part of their portfolio.
So I'm always curious about how writers come up with ideas. When I was a little kid, I happened to be in a class with a girl who happened to have a mother named Cynthia who wrote a book about our class. And it was semi-fictionalized, but it created a bit of a scandal because it was a little bit too truthful. So I'm curious, how do you deal with, should Mark at least be worried about your next piece?
It's a nice question. It's about what is going around. So I got my book, I'm doing animation of black cop, white cop, can you be a cop? So, so that I can see the kid's mind. Situations and the environment that you're in bring up ideas of you creating certain content.
I get ideas from all over the place, and a lot of times it's taking a lot of different ideas that occurred at one point in my life and finally giving them like a clear connection, like they were just a dot that didn't have any like line connecting them, and then finally one happened. Turtle A, it was because I was watching the show Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, coupled with, there was an acting class I had taken way back when called Lucid Body, where you like physicalize different characters through different places in your body using like the chakra centers. And so it was like, all right, what would like this exploded chakra center come into contact with this exploded chakra center? Like, how do they talk? All that like shaped into Turtle A. The one I'm writing right now, that came from watching a lot of very sub-quality media. And what happens, and this is also how I started writing my fan fiction as well, is that I'll watch something or read something that I in my head I go, oh, I could have done this better, or I wouldn't have done it this way, or this was a flaw. They could have done more with this, and they just left it sitting there. And so that's where I'll get an idea from. And even if I then don't go on to like write the fan fiction with that idea, it's still an idea of like, oh, but like, what if you had a character who had a negative superpower, and you see these characters who are like, oh, they have a string of good luck, and that is their like special ability. So the book I'm writing now is a girl who has cartoonishly bad luck that infects those in close physical proximity to her, which sounds horrible, and it is. But it's like, all right, how is she gonna take that and use that to actually not constantly ruin her life, but help her in some way, or just, I mean, it's still gonna make her life annoying, but how is she gonna make it so it's not always actively working against her? And that sort of is like, oh, so now she has this negative superpower. And that came from watching a children's show, which I think could have used a lot more work in the writing process. And yeah, so it kind of comes from all over. They're very just sporadic ideas or concepts that I'll just like think about or hit on, like something I'll see with it and be like, oh, but what is that really? And that starts to like spiral.
You know the ending before you start, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I finally sit down, I need to know roughly beginning, middle, and end. And I see things really visually. I kind of like see a movie in my head, and then I just write what I see. I knew roughly where I needed to get to, but it took me like 4 years to write that book in the end, because there were so many like misdirections and wrong paths. For the second novel, Bullets Wallower, that was a really complicated plot, and again, I knew what needed to happen, but it has two protagonists, and then like a third one who kind of comes in and out, and so for that one, I plotted it. I wrote a really meticulous outline that was like 22 pages single-spaced in the end, and then I wrote the rough draft based on that outline, and then ended up with the book. And now for this third novel, which I just started writing like the other day, again, I know some key moments, and I know what happens at the end, but for this one, I'm trying to be a little more spontaneous and playful, and I'm just actually looking at it sentence by sentence, like what can I say in the next sentence that will make you want to keep reading? And then I'm just going like that. And it's really weird and different, but maybe it'll be cool. I don't know, we'll see.
I'm a lot like Elizabeth in that I also think about it very visually and see like a movie in my head as I'm writing. I've always written with an outline, so every time I've pitched a story to my publisher, it has come with a very detailed outline, which I don't think they actually need, but I give it to them because I can't sit down and write it otherwise. Because for me, that's how I'm going to break down my timing for writing it. I usually do like one main plot point is a chapter, so that means that I will write this many chapters in this amount of time to keep myself on track. So I also do that outlining thing, although it's not 22 pages single-spaced. It's like 3 sentences and bullet pointed. But I also do the outlining. I have a concept of like this is beginning, middle, and end, but then as I'm writing it, I discover a lot of things, usually like, oh, this isn't working at all, and this is all going to change, but now I'm too far into it, so I need to just finish it out to the end, and then I'll go back and make those edits or things like that. With the short stories I did, that was a bit different. I wrote a series of short stories about life after death. Those I kind of had a word or a concept, and I was like, all right, well, let's just see how that turns out. So yeah, for that there was less of a clear, concise beginning, middle, and end, but it's also a short story, so you're gonna discover that probably in like one sitting.
I see you're writing for a Black audience. It's not a monolith, right? So you have Black immigrants, you have African Americans, and then you have like Black migrants from Africa. How do you bridge that? Because it's very splintered. How do you capture everybody to make sure it's relatable?
Very good question. The difference is you need to be in these 3 groups for you to understand how they think, how they reason. For Africans like me who come here, most of them just concentrate on having a dream life. For an African American, is not thinking about the American dream. He is American already. And so a person like me who comes and says, hey, in Africa, kids walk without shoes. Oh, what? Yeah? So the only way that I feel I can bring this out is if the white community understands that, you know, there is a duty that they need to do to help the other group of people. And that's why most of my books, I take them to the white community saying, hey, there is a problem in this community and you are contributing to that community because you don't know how somebody is raising their kid. It is fear that people have impacted. That's why I'm coming up with a book called White Cop, Black Cop, Can You Change? Can You Be a Cop? So, because they also do certain good job. Our cops back home is a problem. So experience is a good teacher, but I'm trying to find a better way between Africans, Americans, and white. What is the best way we can raise such a situations to resolve a problem?
Thanks, Sas. So I think we're going to wrap up now. I just wanted to thank again all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing their insights and journeys. Special thank you to Elizabeth Gonzalez-James, who was kind enough to meet with me and Deborah multiple times to share her previous experience participating in or moderating author panels, and she gave us a lot of valuable feedback and suggestions for today's event. Thank you all for coming.